Get ready to strap in, switch on, and follow orders for one of history's most shocking experiments. Literally.
This says danger, severe shock.
Told to zap the person on the other side.
Incorrect. 90 volts. Doesn't like that.
Even when he's yelling out in pain.
I can't continue if I hear this man screaming.
It was the revolutionary experiment that showed what could lead ordinary people to perform unthinkable acts. Now, for the first time in decades, who will follow orders?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's incorrect. 105 volts.
Who will refuse?
I can't do this.
And what would you do if put to the test? From Milgram to a modern-day McDonald's, where this young girl was stripped and abused. Were they just following orders?
Why didn't you stop?
Tonight, what's your breaking point? Can you survive on your instincts alone? Your gut reaction, first impulse, the eyes in the back of your head. Basically, it all comes down to Basic Instincts, a Primetime limited series. Here now, Chris Cuomo.
Imagine this scenario. You go to a prestigious university to participate in a learning and memory experiment. When you arrive, you discover that the teaching instrument is this machine, which seems to give electroshocks to a man on the other side of the wall. As you move up the scale, he begins to scream out in pain.
The experiment requires that you continue.
The experimenter pressures you to go on. Would you agree to continue with the experiment?
That's all.
That's the question Stanley Milgram, a social psychologist at Yale University, posed in a famous series of experiments about obedience and authority.
Answer, horse.
He told his subjects they were part of a learning and memory experiment.
We want to find out just what effect punishment will have on learning in this situation.
The man on the left is assigned the role of teacher. The man on the right, the learner, is an accomplice who's been instructed to give lots of wrong answers. But Milgram wasn't testing memory. He wanted to know how much pain an ordinary person would inflict on a stranger when ordered by an authority figure.
Sentence, movie.
His subjects, the so-called teachers, gave what they thought was an increasingly painful shock each time a wrong answer was given.
165 volts. Time.
But in fact, there were no shocks at all.
180 volts.
And the subject was hearing a pre-recorded voice at each shock level.
Can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man.
435 volts.
In the end, 2/3 of his subjects administered the highest, most dangerous shock on the machine.
Answer is woman. 450 volts. That's it.
It's been 45 years since the Milgram experiment took place, but would people behave any differently today? To find out, we teamed up with Dr. Jerry Berger, a social psychologist at Santa Clara University in California.
People have often asked this question about, would we find these kinds of results today? And some people try to dismiss the Milgram findings by saying that's something that happened back in the 60s. People aren't like that anymore.
We're about to find out if people have really changed.
I'm a teacher. Oh, man. Okay.
39-year-old Troy Shasker is an electrician. He's been paid $50 to participate and told that the money is his to keep even if he quits the experiment early. He's worried about the dangers of the electroshock machine.
Wow. I don't think I can shock him that hard if he really does screw up. That's severe shock there.
Yeah, there are 25.
I could just go get my shotgun.
In the room next door, Troy watches as the learner gets strapped into his chair. His anxiety rises when he hears the next scripted line.
I should probably bring up, a couple of years ago at Kaiser, they diagnosed a mild heart condition. I'm really not too worried about it. It's not that serious. But
well, you should know that while the shocks that we'll be using today may be painful, they're not dangerous. Okay?
Milgram intended that exchange to set up a conflict in the subject's mind, a choice between the health of the learner and the authority of the experimenter.
So when he gets them right, I get shocked?
Now, Troy starts reading Ken the word pairs he's supposed to memorize.
Blue, girl. Nice, day. Fat, neck. Number 1.
Then the test begins.
Blue, boy, girl, grass, hat.
The learner must decide which of the 4 words is the correct match. At first, everything goes smoothly.
Correct. I was confident that he was doing really good at first, and then it started looking bad.
At 75 volts, Troy hears the first sign of trouble.
Soft, rug, pillow, hair, grass. Incorrect. 75 volts. I could actually hear him next door going, ow, oh, and he kept getting things wrong. Incorrect. 90 volts. He doesn't like that.
At 105 volts, he's clearly uneasy.
I got a little moist on my forehead there. I wasn't comfortable. I can't tell you why I listened to him and kept going. I should have just said no. The correct word was duck.
Near the end, he's almost willing Ken to learn the right word pairs through the wall.
Horse. Incorrect. 135 volts.
Troy starts laughing nervously.
The correct word was woman. Rock, house.
At 150 volts.
Incorrect. 150 volts.
That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble.
Will Troy listen as the learner begs him to stop, or will he follow Brian's orders?
Tell him the correct word, pair of white.
The correct word was white horse.
And the next item, please continue.
The next item is sad.
He obeys the orders.
Face.
Why didn't you stop?
I saw him getting strapped in, and they were just like little. I mean, he could have just, if he was in that much pain, he could have just tore himself off.
Why are you putting it on him and not you or the experimenter?
I was just doing my job. I was doing what I was supposed to do. 75 volts. So I guess the influence of having the conductor of the experiment right there next to me, telling me to keep going, had a lot to do with it. Cool day.
We tested 18 men and 22 women.
Very often, the first time they hear a noise from the other room.
Wrong. 90 volts.
The typical response is to turn toward the experimenter and, if not say something, at least give a look that says, what should I do? And of course, when an expert tells them, not a problem, this is nothing to worry about, continue, the rational thing to do in that situation is to continue.
He's not finger in the face. He's not a drill sergeant.
No, you don't have to be threatening. The power that he has in this situation comes in part because he's an authority figure, and we're all trained a little bit to obey authority figures, but also he's the expert in this situation. He's the one that knows about this machine.
Incorrect. 105 volts.
In the end, almost 2/3 of the men agreed to administer the highest shock. For the past 30 years, there have been severe restrictions on using humans in social psychology research. To avoid putting subjects under too much stress, Dr. Berger made a significant change to our experiment. In this experiment, you stopped at 150 make-believe volts. In Milgram, they went much higher.
We stopped for ethical reasons. We couldn't put people through the agony that Milgram's participants went through.
Go on with the procedure, please, teacher.
There's no way to know for sure whether any of our subjects would have continued farther up the scale. However, Milgram's research may offer a clue.
Don't the man's health mean anything?
Whether the learner likes it or not,
But he might be dead in there.
When we look back at Milgram's data, what we find is that point, that 150-volt point that we stopped at, is something of a point of no return.
150 volts.
That's all.
If people go past that 150 mark, there's an 80% chance they're going to go all the way to the end of the board.
When we come back, how do you think women would test compared to the men?
Ow. That's incorrect.
The battle of the sexes when we return.
Primetime Basic Instincts continues with Chris Cuomo.
How many men would agree to electroshock a stranger when ordered to do so by our experimenter?
Incorrect answer, 90 volts.
Ultimately, more than 2/3 of the men we tested agreed to administer the highest shock, which made us wonder, would the kinder, gentler sex be more responsive to the cries of pain on the other side of the wall?
That's all. Get me out of here.
I think women are more compassionate beings, more emotional beings, more likely to respond to an emotional outburst.
At first, women did seem far more concerned about the effects of pain on the learner.
I'm an RN.
Okay.
I take care of people. I don't, inflict pain, normally.
I am assuming you're really not going to give someone a heart attack.
I'm seeing stuff go all the way up here. Do we ever get up this far? Because this says danger, severe shock.
Chris is 50. She's married and has a 19-year-old daughter.
When it starts to get up in here, the labeling is
Well, we don't
not
know.
indicative,
We
right?
don't know how far it's going to go because it all depends on how the learner learns
Right.
the words.
Good luck. Number 3,
At first, she doesn't seem too concerned.
man, lady, tub, neck. Ow. That's incorrect.
By the way, Chris is a 7th grade teacher.
Number 8, soft, rug, pillow, hair, grass. Oh, incorrect.
Then, at 75 volts, we notice something
75
strange.
volts.
A smile.
I teach kids, so I can kind of tell shock from not shock. So when somebody just kind of goes, oh no, I have to write a 5-paragraph essay, I don't pay much attention to that. So I listen to see if the kid is really surprised or upset. And you always hear a little beforehand. I didn't hear the so that's why I smiled.
Pretending to be hurt.
Yeah, playing with it.
She continues to move deliberately up the row of switches.
90 volts. Oh, I'm sorry, that's incorrect. 105 volts. Ooh, I'm sorry. Wet goes with duck. 120. I've had that shock myself.
So you're thinking now,
This isn't good. I've been reassured that there would be no pain involved.
and that's making you think what?
That I'm not sure I believe the professor, and that I'm going to think carefully about what I'm hearing as I'm going along.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a white horse. This says 150 volts. Deep breath.
That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please. My heart's starting to bother me. I refuse to go on. Let me out.
Well,
Please go on. The next item is sad.
okay. Now, he said that he had a heart problem.
Remember, while the shocks may be painful to him, they're not dangerous. We know that.
Okay, we're aware of that, and there's not going to be any lawsuit from his medical facility, right?
Well, if anything happens to him, I am responsible.
That's what I needed to know.
Okay.
Why is that what you needed to know?
I needed to know that he heard what the gentleman said, and I needed to know that he knew, and that he was responsible, and that he was aware of what was happening.
You heard the man say, "My heart hurts."
I did.
And just having the guy in the lab coat saying, "Keep going, it's fine, I'm telling you it's fine, going," somewhat divorced you from your own decision-making power?
Oh, sure. It's just like when I'm told to administer the state tests for hours on end.
You're doing your job.
Doing my job.
She told us later she didn't believe she would have shocked the learner in the danger zone. What were the differences between men and women?
The argument has always been that, well, women are going to be more empathic. They're going to be more caring and concerned about the man on the other side of the wall.
Grass, duck.
And yet, some women showed little emotion during the experiment.
Wrong. 120 volts. Wrong. 135 volts.
Didn't go all the way down. Please go ahead. Okay.
Wrong. 150 volts.
That's all. Get me out of here.
Right,
I told you I had heart
White
trouble.
horse.
My heart's starting to bother me
Please
now.
continue with the next
Get me
item.
out of here,
Sad.
please.
Others seemed disturbed as the experimenter pressures them to continue.
The next word is sad.
I can't continue if I hear this man screaming and he wants it to stop.
It's absolutely essential that you continue.
But why if we hear him screaming?
Whether the learner
'Cause
likes
if I
it or
was-
not, we must continue until he's learned all the word pairs correctly. Okay? Sad, please.
That's all. Get me out of here.
Both of these women went on to give the highest shock of 150 volts to the learner.
One could argue that it's very difficult for a woman to be assertive. Okay, and many women in our society have a more difficult time saying no to the male experimenter.
You had a very diverse situation here, women, different ethnic backgrounds.
It's reasonable to guess that culture would come into this and the culture might play a role. There are some societies, we call them collectivist cultures, in which people are more geared toward doing what is good for the group.
My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please.
White House. Set.
I refuse to go on.
Face. In Asia, like punishment from parents as well as like punishments from schools are actually kind of common. 90 volts.
We tested 22 women and were surprised to find that women were more likely to continue to the highest shock. 73% of women, 65% of the men.
The voltage is 150 volts.
That's all.
And we began to notice a pattern. The majority of people who continued to follow orders refused to take responsibility for the learner's safety.
It's not my responsibility. You all, brought this. We're volunteers.
It's your control lab experiment.
I see. Okay.
I'm just a conduit for you.
Well, I just flipped the switch. I mean, he chose to be there himself to take the shocks, and that was his choice.
If responsibility can be placed elsewhere or diffused among other people, then we can avoid any blame, any regret, any of those things that happen after the fact. The people who deferred the responsibility didn't feel good about it, but it allowed them to continue because it really wasn't them making the decisions, it was the experimenter.
When we come back, as the experimenter pressures this man to continue.
I'm not a sadist.
Please continue. The next item is sad.
The experiment allows me to walk out at any time, and I will walk out if you want to push this.
The stage is set for a confrontation.
Primetime, Basic Instincts continues. Once again, Chris Cuomo.
2 nice day.
In our control room, Dr. Berger closely watches every reaction to the learner.
150 volts.
That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble.
Can I ask him if he's okay?
Are you okay?
Are there clues that indicate whether certain people might be more compliant with authority?
Wrong. 90 volts.
When you were watching, how good were you at guessing, oh, this person may go or this may not?
It was impossible to tell. I tried to guess. I tried to look for signs, body language, anything to try to guess who's going to continue and who's going to stop. And that tells me that it's not that there are certain kinds of people who are obviously different from the rest of us. It tells me that probably all of us are capable.
46-year-old Fred is a self-described nonconformist. He's married, has no children, and works as a software engineer at an internet company.
That is incorrect. 75 volts.
After hearing the first scream of pain, Fred's face shows no emotion. What at this point is keeping you in the chair?
It's two consenting adults saying we're going to do this. Now, until some point, one of us has to say stop.
So you put all of the responsibility in terms of when was the right quit point on the learner?
For quite a lot of this, yes. I mean, there is going through my head, how long are we going to do this? I am waiting for the other person to say stop. I don't know where I would have just said stop on my own.
Suddenly, at 150 volts, he meets his moral tipping point.
That is incorrect. 150 volts.
That's all. Get me out of here.
He said that's all. We're not doing any more of this.
Okay. Please read in the correct word pair.
The correct word pair was white horse.
And please continue. The next item is sad.
No. He has said no joy. I'm not doing this anymore.
Well, I want to remind you, though, that the shocks may be painful to him, but they're not dangerous.
It doesn't matter. I'm not a sadist. He has said no more. He is not agreeing to this. I'm not agreeing to this.
Okay, the experiment requires that you continue with the next item of SAD.
The experiment allows me to walk out at any time, and I will walk out if you want to push this.
No, well, that is correct. It's absolutely essential that you continue. Okay, remember, whether the learner likes it or not.
The teacher doesn't like it, he's walking out.
Okay, we can discontinue participation. That's just fine.
Okay.
I understand.
Once somebody says no, it's no.
Okay.
I mean, this was obviously at this point now wrong to go on. It's not even an intellectual debate.
Well, aren't we supposed to do what we're told?
Do you have a brain? Shouldn't you use it too? If somebody walks up to you and says the blackboard is white and they've got on a lab coat, do you believe them? No, you've got your own eyes. I mean, you look at Nuremberg. I was just following orders. I'm sorry, we're still gonna line you up and shoot you for war crimes. That's not an excuse.
Fred is talking about the Nuremberg trials of Nazi war criminals who defended themselves, saying they were just following orders.
I had to obey. I had only learned the life of a soldier.
During the war, Adolf Eichmann deported millions of Jews to death camps. He was finally arrested in 1961. 3 months later, Milgram began his famous experiment, fascinated by how such an ordinary-looking man could commit such heinous acts. More recently, these graphic photos and videos of the abuse of prisoners at Abu Ghraib prison raised disturbing questions about the interrogation techniques during the war. Why did so many American soldiers agree to abuse and humiliate these defenseless prisoners? The soldier's name is Lindy England. Her excuse for abusing prisoners, an echo from the Milgram experiment.
We don't feel like we were doing things that we weren't supposed to because we were told to do them.
Lindy England was sentenced to 3 years for her crimes and dishonorably discharged from the military. The excuse of following orders has never been upheld in court. Is there an analogy here to what we saw with Nazi Germany?
What we find when we have situations where people act in atrocious ways, people are in a situation where they're not quite sure what they're supposed to do, okay? That there's an escalation, they start small, they move up to more and more difficult and more challenging and more questionable behaviors.
The next one will be 150 volts.
Why do you think you listened to what the experimenters did? Why do you think that was?
He was in charge and he told me, go ahead and continue with it because I'm under his control too. I'm doing what he's telling me to do.
During the experiment, only 1/3 of our subjects refused to continue.
It's essential that you continue.
No, I can't in good conscience continue at this point.
Okay, you have no choice. You must continue.
No, I do have a choice, and I'm not continuing.
You're going to hold me down?
Whether the learner likes it or not, it would be helpful if you continued.
But I'd rather not.
So what made them stop when the majority went on? We noticed that people who resisted early in the experiment seemed less likely to continue to the end. This man tried to quit after he heard the 3rd cry of pain.
Okay, I'm done.
A second clue. All the subjects who refused to obey the experimenter's final orders told us they felt directly responsible for their actions.
I would have felt that I would have hit the switch that would have killed him. If he died, I would feel a deep responsibility.
When we come back, the Milgram experiment comes to life.
I was begging her just to take me to the police department because I didn't do anything wrong.
A stranger on the phone pretending to be a police officer orders people at a McDonald's to strip search an employee and make her do jumping jacks in the nude. How much farther will it go?
Primetime Basic Instincts continues with Chris Cuomo.
April 9th, 2004. Evening rush hour at the local McDonald's where assistant manager Donna Summers suddenly gets a strange call about a theft.
He said he was a police officer, and I was talking to him about something being stolen, and that one of the employees had done it.
High school senior Louise Ogborn was working an extra shift when her manager calls her into the tiny back office.
And she said, well, they said it was a little girl that looked like you in a McDonald's uniform, so it had to be you.
It was the beginning of a terrifying ordeal caught on videotape here on one of the McDonald's surveillance cameras. the man on the phone ordered Summers to confiscate the girl's clothing and do a strip search.
I honestly thought he was a police officer and what I was doing was the right thing.
The caller told Donna Summers to get her fiancé, Walter Nix, to watch the teenager during the restaurant's rush hour. He then ordered Nix to force her to do jumping jacks, hit her, and even perform a sexual act. Naked and vulnerable, Louise Ogborn says she never even tried to escape.
When an adult tells you to do something, that's what you do. You don't argue. You know, somebody smacks you on the hand, you listen.
The story made headlines as a real-life example of the Milgram experiment. Why did these people follow the bizarre orders of a stranger on the phone? Social psychologist Dr. Phil Zimbardo was a consultant in the McDonald's case.
Usually, obeying authority is good. We obey our parents and we obey our teachers. The problem is, it's fine to obey just authority. It's not fine to obey unjust authority.
But is there anything that would stop people from obeying the orders of an authority figure?
Incorrect. You three must decide the punishment to be administered.
Milgram found when he used a team of 2 accomplices who both refused to continue, 90% of his subjects followed their example. So we wonder, would compliance with the experimenter's orders decrease if we added an accomplice to our own experiment?
So you can turn that word sheet over.
On the left, the real subject, Michelle. On the right, Tammy, our new accomplice who starts the test.
75 volts.
As she started going up the scale, and then she started reacting, I thought, okay, well, maybe she's just holding it too long, because I did notice she would hold it down a little bit.
But at 90 volts, Tammy pretends to be too disturbed to continue.
I don't think I can do this.
Teacher 2, would you please take over? Sorry.
With little apparent emotion, Michelle takes over.
The correct word pair is cool cave. That's incorrect. 105 volts. 120 volts.
I felt the pressure of, wow, it's up to me, I'm the last one. Somebody has to keep the experiment going.
That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble.
Please continue. The correct word pair is white horse.
He said to go. I can't do this.
She is visibly breaking down.
The correct pairing is white horse. I'm sorry, I can't continue.
Okay.
I started shaking. It wasn't the very last word. I mean, that was my breaking point, but the one before that, it was getting pretty bad.
At 150 volts, she refuses to continue, despite the experimenter's orders. But Michelle is in the minority. In one of the most surprising findings of our experiment, we discovered that even with a moral guide sitting in the same room as our subject, there was little decrease in compliance with the orders of an authority figure. 63% of our subjects continued to electroshock the learner even after our accomplice protested. That's only a slight drop from the 70% in our original experiment. Milgram believed that if you could find some other people who also wanted to reject the authority, that was your best bet for breaking out of the conformity.
I suspect if we'd had 3 or 4 people stop the experiment, it would have been very difficult for people to continue because they, at that point, would feel that continuing was the abnormal response.
And in the real-life application of Milgram's experiment, the McDonald's case, Walter Nix was sentenced to 5 years in prison for sexual abuse. Donna Summers was fired and pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor charge. Her justification for her actions was another disturbing echo from the Milgram experiment.
I was following the instructions of what a police officer was telling me. You weren't there, you didn't have the phone call? You have no idea what you would have done in that situation? You think you do, but you don't know.
When we come back, an experiment that goes even further. What will happen to ordinary men in a world without rules?
Primetime, Basic Instincts continues. Here's Chris Cuomo.
Most of our subjects were convinced they wouldn't have continued to electroshock the learner much further. Patty is a registered nurse.
I wasn't going to do it.
Can you be 100% sure? Because you did start asking the next question.
The next item is sad.
I did start asking the next question, yes.
Which does somewhat question your resolve not to go forward.
Right. I know. It sounds like a contradiction.
But how could she be certain? Social psychologist Phil Zimbardo's upcoming new book, The Lucifer Effect, explains why normal people commit evil acts. Zimbardo is famous for his landmark 1971 study, the Stanford Prison Experiment.
What makes good people sometimes do bad things? Is it some psychopathic, sadistic tendency which is latent that emerges? Or is it that ordinary good people could be seduced to doing terrible things by powerful situational forces? No fear of action.
He paid college students $15 a day to role play as prisoners and guards in a make-believe jail run out of the basement of the Stanford Psychology Department. Prisoners were given new identities by number instead of name. Rick Yacco was a broadcasting major.
I still remember my own number after all these years. It was 1037.
Prisoner 8612.
The prisoner group was forced to wear loose smocks, no underwear, and tight-fitting pantyhose caps to simulate shaven heads. The group acting as guards dressed in khaki uniforms and mirrored sunglasses. They were armed with nightsticks. 18-year-old Dave Eshelman decides to take on the role of an aggressive and intimidating guard.
It was my impression that it was kind of boring. Nothing was really happening. So in my 18-year-old brain, I thought it would be a good thing if I were to force the action.
Now, there's a couple ways that we can do this.
A couple of nights before, I had watched a Paul Newman movie called Cool Hand Luke, and they had this great character in there that was the warden.
I can be a good guy, or I can be one real mean son bitch.
It's all up to you.
It's all up to you.
To everyone's surprise, the rest of the guards followed his lead and started harassing the prisoners, waking them up at night and forcing them to do counts for punishment.
14. Prisoners started calling me John Wayne. I objected to that nickname because, you know, that was not the character I was playing.
Doug Corpy was one of the prisoners.
They would come out and tell us to exercise. We would say, and if we don't?
But within 24 hours, the prisoners, led by Corpy, launched a full-scale rebellion.
They ripped off their numbers, they took up their stocking cap, they barricaded themselves in the cell, and they started taunting the guards and cursing the guards.
The guards retaliated, escalating the abuse, forcing prisoners to exercise constantly and depriving them of food, sleep, and bathroom rights.
They took our clothes off, they took the cots out, and then they took the bicycle chains that were on our feet, and they chained us together, naked.
Since Zimbardo's ground rules clearly prohibited the use of physical violence, the guards invented a degrading series of psychological humiliations.
You be the bride of Frankenstein, and you be Frankenstein. I want you to walk over here like Frankenstein and say that you love to a man.
Anything I could find that, you know, would humiliate them in some way.
Get up, girls. Get up.
That would try to break down any solidarity they had with each other.
You smile to an athlete. You get down here and do 10 push-ups.
Then the guards forced the prisoners to shame a rebel into submission.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
Prisoner 819 began weeping uncontrollably. Two of the prisoners told Zimbardo they were suffering from severe trauma and were removed from the experiment early. One of those prisoners was Doug Corpy.
Damn it! Doug! You don't know! I mean, God! I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside, don't you know?
All I would have had to say to Phil is, Phil, let me out now or I'll sue your ass. Why didn't I think of that?
In less than a week, 4 of the students were released after having emotional breakdowns. Zimbardo decided to terminate the experiment.
The Stanford Prison study is clearly thought of as one of the most unethical studies ever done because kids suffered. They suffered day after day after day, and it got worse and worse. And we should have ended it sooner.
Even without the orders of Milgram's authority figure, the subjects in the Stanford prison experiment lost their moral compass. They began to act in morally questionable ways because of the power of the situation.
I was able to set an agenda that was really evil, and yet nobody questioned it and nobody stopped it.
Now what would it be?
You emerge as something alien to yourself, that you become the bad apple. You are corrupted by the situation.
Despite the importance of their findings, both Zimbardo and Milgram were condemned for putting their subjects under the stress of believing they were capable of harming another human being. Since then, all research with humans has been restricted, which is why it's been impossible to revisit the Milgram experiment for 45 years.
What we like to do with our teachers is...
When we come back, the controversy over human experimentation.
Incorrect. 75 volts.
Since the 70s, the use of humans in scientific research has been restricted. In order to redo the Milgram experiment, ABC News' protocol was vetted by the American Psychological Association. Clinical psychologists pre-screened our subjects for psychological stability. We also told participants they could pull out of the experiment at any time, and that deception might be involved.
Do you think you can learn these types of things about behavior without testing human beings?
If you ask people, what do you think you'll do? What do you think the average person would do? We're often wrong. The only way to really know for sure is to put people in that situation and find out what they really will do.
Even Dr. Berger discovered something unnerving when he took the practice test.
Having the experimenter tell me things like, it's essential that you continue, it's important to continue, it dawned on me that if I were a participant, if I were in this situation, I think I might continue.
It is a warning that everyone may be at risk.
What it does is it helps me see vulnerability for situations.
I should have been in control of what I decided to do, but I was deferring to him.
150 volts.
At the right time, in the right place, anyone may be capable of anything.
Unless we begin to focus on what is the situation that makes ordinary people do these evil things, then the situations keep going on and on.
I'm not going to sit here and say that, you know, I'm Mr. Goody's Choo-Shoes and I would have stopped this at this point. I don't know. I really don't.
The Milgram experiment is a cautionary tale. Sometimes all that's necessary for evil to succeed is for ordinary people to just do what they're told.
When situations have these elements to them, we can no longer count on people making decisions based on what they feel is right or wrong, because now they're caught up in a situation that is leading them to do things that may even surprise them.